The USS Meridian moved slowly through the dark space between stars. Its metal hull gleamed under the light of distant suns. Inside the ship, Ambassador Lisa Carter sat at her desk reading reports on her datapad. She was a woman in her mid-30s, with brown hair pulled back in a neat style. Her blue eyes focused on the words in front of her. She wore a simple gray suit that made her look like any other government worker. Captain Jake Morrison walked into her quarters without knocking. His face showed worry lines around his eyes. He had been flying ships for 20 years, and knew when something felt wrong. "We'll reach Zephyrian space in 6 hours," he told her. "Are you sure about this mission, Lisa? These aliens have never been friendly to humans before." Lisa looked up from her reading. Her voice was calm and steady. "The Earth government wants peace with the Zephyrian Empire. They control 400 star systems. If we can make a trade agreement with them, it will help millions of people back home." Jake sat down in the chair across from her desk. "I've heard stories about King Vexthul. They say he thinks humans are weak. Some of my contacts in the merchant fleet tell me he calls us walking meat." "People say many things when they're afraid of change," Lisa replied. She set down her datapad and folded her hands. "Fear makes everyone say stupid things sometimes. Maybe when the king meets me, he'll see that humans can be reasonable partners." Jake shook his head. "I still don't like it. Why did Earth send just one diplomat? Usually these big meetings have whole teams of people." Lisa smiled in a way that didn't reach her eyes. "Sometimes one person can do what a whole team cannot. I've handled difficult negotiations before." 3 hours later, the USS Meridian dropped out of faster-than-light travel. In front of them hung a massive planet covered in blue and gold clouds. The world looked beautiful from space, but sensors showed cities made of crystal and metal that stretched across entire continents. Huge ships moved around the planet like silver fish swimming in an ocean. "This is Zephyrian Command Control," a voice spoke over the ship's communication system. The translator made the alien words sound cold and mechanical. "Human vessel, you will follow our guide ships to the landing platform. Do not change course or you will be destroyed." Jake gripped his captain's chair tighter. "Friendly bunch," he said under his breath. 2 sleek alien ships appeared on either side of the Meridian. They were 3 times larger than the human vessel, and covered in strange markings that seemed to move and change. Energy weapons were clearly visible along their hulls. Lisa watched through the main window as they flew toward the planet. The crystal cities grew larger as they got closer. Tall spires reached up into the atmosphere like frozen lightning. She had studied pictures of Zephyrian architecture, but seeing it in person was different. Everything looked sharp and dangerous, as if the buildings themselves were weapons. "Landing platform ahead," Jake announced. "It's big enough to hold 50 ships our size." The platform was a circle of black metal floating high above the main city. Other alien vessels sat on it like sleeping monsters. The USS Meridian settled down with a soft thud. Through the windows they could see hundreds of Zephyrian soldiers waiting for them. The soldiers stood 8 feet tall and looked like a cross between lizards and humans. Their skin was covered in scales that changed color from green to gold to black. Each one carried weapons that hummed with energy. Their eyes were large and yellow with pupils that moved like slits. "Welcome committee looks excited to see us," Jake said. He tried to sound joking, but his voice was tight with worry. Lisa stood up and smoothed down her suit. "Remember, Jake, we're here as guests. Act respectful but not afraid. These beings respect strength, not fear." "How do you know so much about them?" Jake asked. Lisa paused for a moment. Something flickered across her face, too quick to identify. "I read all the reports on the way here. Earth intelligence has been studying the Zephyrians for years." They walked to the ship's main door. Jake's security team wanted to come with them, but Lisa had already said no. The Zephyrians had made it clear that only the ambassador and captain would be allowed into the palace. The door opened with a hiss. Hot, humid air rushed into the ship. It smelled like metal and something else Lisa couldn't identify. As they stepped onto the platform, the alien soldiers moved to surround them. Their weapons stayed pointed down, but the message was clear. One of the aliens stepped forward. He was larger than the others and wore armor decorated with silver symbols. When he spoke, his voice sounded like gravel falling down a metal tube. I am General Krex, commander of the Royal Guard. King Vexthul has decided to grant you an audience. You will follow me. Do not touch anything. Do not speak unless spoken to. Do not look directly at the king unless he gives permission. Lisa nodded politely. We understand, General. Thank you for your hospitality. General Krex made a sound that might have been laughter. Hospitality. Yes. We are very hospitable to interesting guests. They walked across the platform toward a group of floating vehicles. The cars had no wheels and made no sound as they moved. Lisa and Jake climbed into one while General Krex got into another. The vehicles rose into the air and began flying toward the largest crystal spire in the city. As they flew, Lisa looked down at the streets below. Millions of Zephyrians moved through the city like ants. The buildings were beautiful but cold, all sharp angles and gleaming surfaces. She saw no parks or trees or anything that looked comfortable. Everything was designed to show power and control. Impressive, Jake said quietly. It's meant to be, Lisa replied. Architecture is often the first weapon in diplomatic warfare. They want us to feel small and weak before we even meet their king. The vehicle landed on a platform halfway up the largest spire. More guards waited for them, these ones wearing different colored armor. They escorted Lisa and Jake through doors that were 30 feet tall and covered in carvings of alien battles. Inside, the palace was even more overwhelming than outside. The ceilings were so high they disappeared into shadows. Columns of crystal, stretched up like frozen waterfalls. Everything was lit by a strange blue light that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Other aliens moved through the hallways. Some looked like the soldiers but wore fancy clothes instead of armor. Others were completely different species, with fur or tentacles or bodies that seemed to be made of living metal. All of them stopped to stare at the two humans as they passed. The king collects species from all over his empire, General Krex explained without being asked. He enjoys studying different forms of life. Some he finds useful, others he finds entertaining. A few he finds delicious. Jake's face went pale, but Lisa showed no reaction. She continued walking with the same calm expression she had worn since leaving Earth. They climbed a long staircase that curved around the inside of the spire. With each step, Lisa could feel the weight of hundreds of alien eyes watching her. Some looked curious. Others looked hungry. A few looked like they were trying to decide if she would be more fun to play with or to eat. Finally, they reached the throne room. The doors were even larger than the ones at the entrance, and they opened by themselves with a deep rumbling sound. Inside, the room was the size of a football field. The throne sat at the far end, raised on a platform that required climbing more stairs to reach. King Vexthul was the largest Zephyrian Lisa had ever seen. He was at least 12 feet tall, and his scales were black with edges of gold. His eyes were the size of dinner plates and glowed with their own light. When he smiled, his teeth looked like knives. So, the king said, his voice echoing through the enormous room. These are the famous humans I have heard so much about. Lisa and Jake walked slowly up the steps toward King Vexthul's throne. Each step echoed in the huge room. Lisa kept her face calm and professional, but she could feel the weight of hundreds of alien eyes watching their every move. The other creatures in the throne room whispered to each other in languages she didn't understand. King Vexthul leaned forward on his massive throne. The chair was made from some kind of black stone that seemed to absorb light. His golden eyes studied Lisa like she was an interesting bug he might step on. You are smaller than I expected, the king said. His voice was deep and rough, like rocks, grinding together. I have heard that humans think they are important in this galaxy. But looking at you, I see only a tiny creature that would break easily. Lisa stepped forward and bowed slightly. Not too deep, which would show weakness, but enough to show respect. Your Majesty, I am Ambassador Lisa Carter. I come from Earth with an offer of friendship and trade between our peoples. Several aliens in the room made sounds that might have been laughter. King Vexthul's mouth opened in what looked like a smile showing rows of sharp teeth. Friendship, the king repeated slowly. How interesting. Tell me, little human, What could your species possibly offer to an empire that spans 400 worlds? Lisa reached into her jacket and pulled out a small device. Several guards moved forward quickly, but the king held up one massive hand to stop them. Lisa activated the device and a holographic display appeared in the air between her and the throne. Earth has developed new technologies for food production, medical treatments, and energy systems, Lisa explained. We can grow crops in environments that were previously impossible to farm. Our medical advances have extended human lifespans by 30% in the last 50 years, and our clean energy systems could help reduce pollution on industrial worlds. King Vexthul looked at the hologram with mild interest. Impressive for such a young species, but tell me, what would you want in return for these wonderful gifts? Safe passage for human merchant ships through Zephyrian space, Lisa said. Access to some of your trade routes, and most importantly, a promise that Earth will be left in peace to develop on its own. The king was quiet for a long moment. Then he began to laugh. It was a terrible sound that filled the enormous room and made Jake step closer to Lisa. Other aliens joined in, creating a chorus of alien sounds that hurt human ears. Peace, King Vexithul finally said. You want peace. How amusing. He stood, up from his throne. Even at this distance, his size was frightening. Do you know what I see when I look at your species, little ambassador? I see meat that walks and talks. I see beings so soft and weak that they ask for peace instead of taking what they want by force. Lisa's expression didn't change. Strength comes in many forms, Your Majesty. Sometimes the strongest choice is to build rather than destroy. Philosophy from a creature that lives for barely 100 years, the king said. How charming. He sat back down and waved one clawed hand. But I am a gracious host. You have traveled far to reach my world. I will consider your proposal. General Krex stepped forward from his position near the throne. Your Majesty, perhaps our guests would enjoy experiencing some of our traditional customs while you make your decision. King Vexthul's eyes lit up with interest. An excellent idea, General. Ambassador Carter, I would like to invite you to join me for a ceremonial hunt tomorrow. It is a great honor that I offer to very few outsiders. Lisa felt something cold touch the back of her neck, but her voice remained steady. That sounds fascinating, Your Majesty. What kind of hunt? We travel to Zerion Prime's moon, the king explained. It is a wild place, full of dangerous creatures. The hunt is meant to test the courage and skill of visiting dignitaries. Those who survive earn great respect throughout my empire. Jake shifted nervously beside Lisa. Your Majesty, Ambassador Carter is here for diplomatic purposes. Perhaps there's another way to show her your customs. King Vexthul's gaze moved to Jake like a snake focusing on prey. Captain Morrison, isn't it? Are you saying that your ambassador lacks the courage for our traditions? Perhaps humans are even weaker than I thought. Lisa put a gentle hand on Jake's arm before he could respond. Captain Morrison is simply concerned for my safety, as any good officer should be. But I would be honored to join your hunt, Your Majesty. When do we depart? Tomorrow at dawn, the king said. General Krex will provide you with appropriate equipment. He paused, and his smile grew wider. I do hope you survive, Ambassador. It would be such a shame if anything happened to Earth's representative. The audience was clearly over. General Krex gestured for Lisa and Jake to follow him out of the throne room. As they walked back through the massive doors, Lisa could hear the aliens behind them talking in excited voices. What the hell was that about? Jake whispered as they walked down the long hallway. Keep your voice down, Lisa replied quietly. These walls probably have listening devices. They were escorted to guest quarters in another part of the palace. The rooms were large but cold, with furniture that was clearly not designed for human bodies. General Krex left them with a promise that someone would come to collect Lisa in the morning. Once they were alone, Jake grabbed Lisa's arm. You can't go on this hunt. It's obviously a trap. They're planning to kill you out there. Lisa walked to the window and looked out at the alien city below. Lights moved through the crystal spires like fireflies in a strange forest. Of course it's a trap, Jake. The question is whether they're smart enough to make it work. What do you mean? Lisa was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was different somehow. Harder. I mean that King Vexthal has made an assumption about humans that might prove to be costly. Jake stared at her. Lisa, you're a diplomat. You negotiate trade agreements and peace treaties. You're not a soldier or a hunter. If you go out there tomorrow, you're going to die. Lisa turned away from the window. In the strange blue light of the alien palace, her face looked different. The soft expression she usually wore was gone, replaced by something Jake had never seen before. Jake, how long have we known each other? She asked. 3 years, since you started working with the Deep Space Diplomatic Corps. And in all that time, have I ever told you what I did before I became a diplomat? Jake thought about it. You said you worked for the government, some kind of research position. Lisa nodded slowly. That's true. I did do research. I researched ways to solve problems that normal diplomacy couldn't handle. She sat down on the edge of the alien bed, which was more like a stone platform. There are some things about my background that aren't in my official files, Jake. What kind of things? Lisa looked at her hands. They were small and soft-looking, the hands of someone who worked at a desk all day. But Jake noticed that her fingers moved differently now, as if they were remembering how to hold something other than a data pad. The kind of things that might be useful on a hunting trip, she said finally. That night, Jake couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the change in Lisa's voice and the way she had looked when she turned away from the window. He had served on ships with soldiers and Marines, and he recognized something in her expression that he had seen in their eyes. It was the look of someone who had killed before and was prepared to do it again. In the room next door, Lisa sat on the floor in a meditation position she hadn't used for 15 years. She was remembering things she had tried to forget. Skills she had hoped never to need again. Names and faces of people who had underestimated her once upon a time. When morning came, she would go on King Vexthal's hunt. But she was beginning to suspect that she might not be the prey. The transport ship lifted off from the palace platform just as the sun began to rise. Lisa sat in the passenger area with 12 Zephyrian guards and King Vexthal himself. The alien king was dressed in hunting clothes that looked more like armor. His weapons were clearly expensive and powerful. Lisa wore simple clothes that the aliens had given her. The fabric was thick and dark, meant to blend in with the forest they would be hunting in. At her side was a basic energy weapon that looked old and worn. The other hunters carried guns that hummed with power and had multiple settings for different types of prey. Tell me, Ambassador, King Vexthal said as they flew toward the moon, have you ever hunted dangerous animals before? Lisa looked out the window at the approaching moon. Its surface was covered with thick forests and deep valleys. I've had some experience with dangerous situations, Your Majesty. The king laughed. Dangerous board meetings, perhaps. Or difficult contract negotiations. He turned to his guards. What do you think, General Krex? How long will our guests survive once we reach the hunting grounds? General Krex made a sound like grinding metal. The Void Stalkers are very active this season, Your Majesty. They have been hungry since the last group of criminals we sent to the moon for punishment. Criminals? Lisa asked. Oh yes, the king said with obvious pleasure. We sometimes send lawbreakers to the moon as an alternative to execution. It's more entertaining this way. Most last about an hour before the creatures find them. Lisa nodded, as if this was perfectly normal information. How sporting. The transport landed in a clearing surrounded by tall trees that looked like they were made of black glass. The air outside was thin and cold. Strange sounds came from the forest around them. Some sounded like animals. Others sounded like machines, breaking down. King Vexthal stepped out of the transport and breathed deeply. Ah, I love this place. The fear in the air makes everything smell sweeter. The hunting party gathered their equipment. Lisa checked her weapon and found that it was set to its lowest power setting. She made a small adjustment that the others didn't notice. The rules are simple, General Krex announced. We spread out through the forest to track the Void Stalkers. Stay within communication range. If you find yourself in serious danger, Call for help immediately. King Vexthal looked directly at Lisa. Of course, sometimes the communication equipment fails. These things happen during exciting hunts. Lisa smiled politely. I understand, Your Majesty. I'll try to stay close to the group. The hunters moved into the forest in different directions. Lisa noticed that the aliens were gradually increasing the distance between themselves and her. Within 20 minutes, she could no longer see any of them through the dark trees. She activated her communication device. This is Ambassador Carter. I seem to have lost sight of the hunting party. General Krex's voice came through the speaker, but it was full of static. We're having some technical difficulties, Ambassador. Try to find shelter and wait for us to locate you. The communication went dead. Lisa looked at the device and saw that it had been damaged. Someone had done something to it before giving it to her. She wasn't surprised. Lisa stood alone in the alien forest and listened to the sounds around her. Something was moving through the trees about 50 yards to her left. Something else was circling around behind her. She counted at least 4 different creatures getting closer to her position. For the first time since arriving on the alien world, Lisa's professional mask slipped. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. When she opened them again, her face was completely different. The polite diplomat was gone. In her place stood someone who looked like they belonged in this dangerous forest. She moved to a large tree and put her back against it. This way nothing could attack her from behind. She held her weapon ready and waited. The first Void Stalker appeared at the edge of the clearing. It was the size of a small car with 6 legs that ended in claws like sword blades. Its body seemed to flicker in and out of existence, making it hard to see clearly. 2 more appeared on the opposite side of the clearing. Lisa studied the creatures with the calm focus of someone who had faced death many times before. She noticed how they moved, how they communicated with each other, how they preferred to attack. This information would keep her alive. The largest Void Stalker made a sound like metal tearing. It was some kind of signal, because all 3 creatures charged at the same time. Lisa moved like water flowing downhill. She rolled to the side as the first creature's claws cut through the air where she had been standing. As she rolled, she fired her weapon twice. Both shots hit the creature in vital spots. The second Void Stalker tried to use its phasing ability to appear behind her. But Lisa had already moved again. She grabbed a sharp piece of the first creature's claw and threw it like a knife. It hit the second stalker in the eye. The third creature was smarter. It stayed back and watched her, trying to understand how this small human was defeating its packmates. Lisa looked at it and smiled. It was not a nice smile. She picked up a rock and threw it at the creature. While it was distracted by the rock, she closed the distance between them. The Void Stalker tried to phase out of normal space, but Lisa had timed her attack perfectly. She caught it while it was half-phased and vulnerable. When the fight was over, 3 dead Void Stalkers lay around the clearing. Lisa checked her weapon and saw that she had used only 5 shots. She looked at her hands and saw that they remembered exactly how to kill efficiently. More sounds came from deeper in the forest. The noise of the fight had attracted other predators. Lisa counted at least 6 different creatures moving toward her position. Instead of looking worried, she looked almost pleased. She began to move through the forest like a ghost. Every few minutes, sounds of violence came from her direction. Roars and screams and the sound of things breaking. But Lisa's voice was never heard among the noise. Back at the palace, King Vexthal was celebrating with his inner circle. They were drinking something that looked like liquid gold and talking about their successful plan. The little human should be dead by now, General Krex said. The Void Stalkers are efficient killers. They rarely leave anything behind to find. Perfect, the king replied. When we return to collect her remains, we'll express our deep sadness at the tragic accident. Then we'll send her captain back to Earth with our demands for human surrender. What will you demand? Asked another alien. King Vexthal's eyes glowed with greed. Everything. Their technology, their worlds, their people. Humans will make excellent slaves once their spirit is broken. And what better way to break their spirit than showing them their diplomat died screaming in an alien forest? The aliens laughed and drank more of their golden liquid. None of them noticed the small monitoring device that was recording their conversation from its hiding place in the room's lighting system. On the moon, Lisa had finished clearing the immediate area of predators. She sat on a fallen log and cleaned her weapon. Around her, the bodies of alien creatures lay scattered through the forest. She had killed them all without making a sound that would alert the hunting party to her survival. She looked up at the sky and calculated how much time she had before the aliens would return. Probably 6 hours. More than enough time to finish what she had started. Lisa Carter, the polite diplomat, had disappeared completely. In her place was someone much more dangerous. Someone who had once been very good at making problems disappear. Permanently. She stood up and began walking deeper into the forest. She had work to do. 6 hours later, the rescue ships arrived at the moon. King Vexthul sat in his personal transport with General Krex and 5 other high-ranking officials. They expected to find pieces of Lisa Carter scattered around the forest floor. Begin the search for remains, the king ordered over the communication system. Look for scraps of clothing, bones, anything we can take back as evidence of the tragic accident. 3 smaller ships spread out over the forest to begin the search. Their sensors swept the area where Lisa had been abandoned. What they found instead made the search teams go quiet with shock. "Your Majesty," came a nervous voice over the comm. "We're reading multiple dead creatures in the target area. Large ones." King Vexthul frowned. "Of course there are dead creatures. The Void Stalkers probably killed each other fighting over the humans' remains." "No, sir. These creatures appear to have been killed by weapons fire and other methods. And Your Majesty, we're detecting a human life sign. It's strong and moving." The king's golden eyes went wide. "Impossible. Check your equipment." "Equipment is working perfectly, sir. The human is alive and appears to be waiting in the original landing zone." King Vexthul grabbed the communication device from General Krex. "All ships converge on the landing zone immediately. I want to see this for myself." When the transport landed in the clearing, King Vexthul stepped out expecting to find a terrified human woman hiding behind a tree. Instead, he found Lisa Carter sitting calmly on a fallen log. She was cleaning dirt from under her fingernails with a piece of sharp metal. Around the clearing, the bodies of alien predators lay in neat piles. Void stalkers, shadow serpents, razor birds, and at least 6 other species of dangerous creatures. All dead. All killed with surgical precision. Lisa looked up as the king approached. Her face showed the same polite expression she had worn during their first meeting, but there was something different in her eyes now, something that made the alien guards take an unconscious step backward. "Your Majesty," Lisa said pleasantly. "Thank you for sending the rescue party. I was beginning to think you might have forgotten about me." King Vexthul stared at the dead creatures surrounding them. How did you survive?" Lisa stood up and brushed dirt off her clothes. "I stayed calm and found a safe place to wait, just as General Krex suggested. Though I have to say the local wildlife is much more aggressive than your briefing materials indicated." General Krex's voice was barely a whisper. "You killed all of these creatures by yourself?" Lisa tilted her head as if the question confused. "I defended myself when they attacked me. Isn't that what anyone would do?" One of the dead Void Stalkers was the size of a small building. Its neck had been broken with what looked like bare hands. Another creature had been killed with its own claws, somehow turned against itself. The precision of each death showed skills that no ordinary diplomat should possess. King Vexthul felt something he had not experienced in decades. Fear, not just concern or worry, but deep, cold fear that ran down his spine like ice water. "We should return to the palace," he said finally. "You must be tired after your ordeal." Lisa smiled. It was the same professional smile she had used throughout her visit, but now it looked different. "Actually, Your Majesty, I feel quite refreshed. There's something about facing mortal danger that really wakes a person up." The flight back to the palace was quiet. Lisa sat in her seat, looking out the window at the passing landscape. The alien officials whispered to each other in their own language, but their eyes never left her. That evening, Lisa was escorted back to her guest quarters, but instead of staying there, she made her way through the palace corridors toward the USS Meridian's landing platform. She moved through the alien architecture like she had studied the building plans for years. Captain Jake Morrison was in his quarters reviewing supply reports when Lisa knocked on his door. He opened it and immediately saw that something fundamental had changed about her. "We need to talk," Lisa said quietly. Jake let her in and sealed the door behind her. "What happened out there, Lisa?" "The Zephyrians are acting like they've seen a ghost, and the reports I'm getting about dead creatures on that moon. How did you survive?" Lisa sat down in the chair across from his desk. For a long moment she was quiet. When she finally spoke, her voice was different from the diplomatic tone Jake was used to hearing. "Jake, I need to tell you something about my background that isn't in my official files. I figured that much. No trade negotiator kills alien monsters with their bare hands." Lisa almost smiled at that. "Before I became a diplomat, I worked for a different part of the Earth government, a part that handled problems that couldn't be solved through normal channels." Jake felt his stomach tighten. He had served in the military and knew about special operations. "What kind of problems?" "The kind where people needed to disappear permanently." Lisa looked at her hands. "I was part of a program called Project Phoenix. We were sent to handle situations that were too sensitive for regular military units." "Assassins," Jake said quietly. "Among other things, we specialized in making impossible problems go away. Enemy agents, corrupt politicians, alien threats during the early contact period, anyone who posed a danger to Earth's interests." Jake stared at her. "How many missions?" 47 confirmed eliminations over 8 years. Lisa's voice was matter-of-fact, like she was reading from a report. "I was very good at my job, Jake. Some people said I was the best." "What happened? Why did you stop?" Lisa was quiet for a moment. "I got tired of killing. I wanted to try building something instead of just tearing things down. The government agreed to let me retire if I took a position in the diplomatic corps. They thought my experience might be useful in understanding how other species think." Jake ran his hands through his hair. "So when King Vexthul sent you on that hunting trip, he made a mistake. He assumed that because I chose diplomacy, I had forgotten how to do anything else." Lisa stood up and walked to the window. "But you never really forget skills like mine, Jake. They just go to sleep until you need them again." "What are you going to do now?" Lisa looked out at the alien city beyond the palace walls. "That depends on King Vexthul. I overheard some interesting conversations while I was supposed to be dying on his moon. He has plans for humanity that go far beyond rejecting our trade proposals." "What kind of plans?" Lisa turned back to face him. In the dim light of the ship's quarters, she looked like a completely different person from the woman who had left Earth 3 weeks ago, the kind that would require me to come out of retirement. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. "Lisa, you can't just start killing alien officials. It would mean war." "There are different kinds of war, Jake. Sometimes, the most effective battles are the ones that look like accidents." Lisa moved toward the door. "But don't worry. I'm going to try the diplomatic approach first. And if that doesn't work?" Lisa paused with her hand on the door control. "Then King Vexthul is going to learn why some humans choose to be civilized. It's not because we're weak. Why then?" Lisa looked back at him and Jake saw something in her eyes that made him understand why alien creatures had died screaming in a dark forest. Because when we're not civilized, we're the most dangerous thing in the galaxy. The next morning, Lisa requested a private meeting with King Vexthul. The alien king was still shaken from seeing her alive and surrounded by dead predators, but he agreed to see her. He was curious about how a simple human diplomat had survived, his perfect trap. Lisa entered the king's private chambers alone despite protests from both human and alien security teams. The room was smaller than the throne room, but still impressive. Ancient weapons from conquered worlds hung on the walls like trophies. King Vexthul sat behind a massive desk made from the skull of some enormous creature. He tried to look confident, but Lisa could see the fear in his golden eyes. "Ambassador Carter," the king said, trying to sound casual. "I trust you slept well after your adventure on the moon." Lisa sat down in the chair across from his desk. Her movements were calm and Controlled. Actually, Your Majesty, I slept better than I have in years. There's something about facing death that helps a person remember who they really are. The king leaned forward. And who are you, really? Lisa smiled. It was not the polite diplomatic smile she had been wearing for days. This smile was cold and sharp like a blade. I think you already know the answer to that question. King Vexthal's claws scraped against the surface of his desk. You're not just a diplomat. No, I'm not. Lisa folded her hands in her lap. But I was hoping we could still resolve the situation diplomatically. You see, I know about your real plans for humanity. The king's eyes narrowed. What plans? Lisa pulled out a small recording device and placed it on the desk between them. She pressed a button and the king's own voice filled the room. Their technology, their worlds, their people. Humans will make excellent slaves once their spirit is broken. King Vexthal stared at the device. Where did you get that? I've been preparing for this conversation since the moment you sent me to die on your moon, Lisa said calmly. You made several mistakes, Your Majesty. The first was assuming that humans are weak because we prefer peace to war. The king stood up from his chair, towering over the small human woman. You dare threaten me in my own palace? I have 10,000 guards within these walls. Lisa didn't move from her chair. Your second mistake was not researching my background more carefully. If you had, you would have learned that I used to have a different job before I became a diplomat. What job? I solved problems that diplomacy couldn't fix. Lisa's voice was quiet but filled with dangerous certainty. I was very good at making problems disappear permanently. King Vexthal felt sweat forming under his scales despite the cool air in the room. You're bluffing. One human cannot threaten an entire empire. Lisa stood up slowly. Let me tell you about your third mistake, Your Majesty. You assumed that because I came here alone, I didn't have backup plans. She walked to the window and looked out at the alien city below. Right now, every major news network in your empire is receiving copies of that recording. They're learning that their great king plans to enslave an entire species. Some of your subjects might not approve of that. The king's face turned darker, shades of green and gold. Impossible. Our communication systems are completely secure. Not from someone who knows how to use them properly. Lisa turned back to face him. I've also sent detailed information about your military weaknesses to several rebel groups in your outer territories. They're probably planning their attacks as we speak. King Vexthal grabbed a weapon from his desk drawer. It was a ceremonial blade that glowed with energy. Even if that's true, you'll never leave this room alive. Lisa looked at the weapon without concern. That brings us to your fourth and final mistake, which is, you invited me into a private room with no witnesses and no security cameras. Lisa's smile grew wider. Do you really think that was wise? The king raised his blade and stepped toward her. Lisa moved like lightning. One moment she was standing by the window. The next moment she was behind the king's desk. The energy blade flew from his hand and embedded itself in the wall. King Vexthal spun around to face her, but Lisa was already moving again. She grabbed the ceremonial blade from the wall and tested its weight and balance. It felt familiar in her hands. Please, Your Majesty, Lisa said quietly. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. The king lunged at her with his claws extended. Lisa sidestepped smoothly and brought the blade up in a perfect arc. King Vexthal stopped moving and looked down at his chest with surprise. How? He whispered. Experience, Lisa replied. I told you I was good at my job. King Vexthal fell forward onto his desk. The recording device was still playing his voice, repeating his plans for human slavery over and over. Lisa wiped the blade clean and placed it back on the wall where it belonged. She straightened her clothes and checked her appearance in a mirror. The polite diplomat had returned as if she had never left. She walked to the door and pressed the alarm button. Within seconds, guards rushed into the room. They found King Vexthal dead at his desk and Ambassador Carter standing calmly nearby. There's been a terrible accident, Lisa announced. His Majesty collapsed suddenly. I think it might have been his heart. The guards surrounded the desk, talking rapidly in their own language. One of them, a captain named Thex, looked at Lisa suspiciously. You were alone with the king when this happened? Lisa nodded sadly. We were discussing trade agreements. He suddenly grabbed his chest and fell forward. I tried to help him, but it was too late. Captain Thex examined the body. The wound was so precise and clean that it looked like it could have been caused by a heart attack. There were no obvious signs of violence. Within an hour, the palace was in chaos. The recording of King Vexthol's plans had indeed reached the news networks. Riots were starting in the outer territories. Several military commanders were demanding explanations. General Krex found himself suddenly in charge of an empire that was falling apart. He called an emergency meeting with his senior staff. "What do we do?" asked one of the generals. "The outer worlds are already declaring independence. The news about the king's slave plans has turned half the empire against us." General Krex looked tired and old. "We accept the human trade proposals, all of them, immediately. But sir, that makes us look weak." "Weaker than having our empire collapse into civil war?" Krex snapped. "Send word to all commanders. Any ship that attacks a human vessel will be court-martialed. We're going to be very nice to the humans from now on." "What about the king's death? Should we investigate?" General Krex was quiet for a long moment. He remembered the piles of dead predators around Lisa Carter on the moon. He remembered the precision of those kills and the calm look in her eyes. "The king died of natural causes," he said finally. "Heart failure. We will not investigate further." 2 days later, the USS Meridian departed Zephyrian space with a signed trade agreement that gave humanity everything they had originally asked for, and more. Lisa Carter sat in her quarters, once again the professional diplomat, reading reports and preparing for their next destination. Captain Jake Morrison found her there as they entered faster-than-light travel. The Zephyrian Empire just announced they're withdrawing from 12 star systems to focus on internal reforms, he said. 3 different rebel groups have declared independence. It's like their whole government just fell apart overnight. Lisa looked up from her datapad. Political systems can be surprisingly fragile when the wrong pressure is applied in the right places. Jake sat down across from her. "Lisa, what really happened in that room with the king?" Lisa's expression was perfectly innocent. "His Majesty had a heart attack during our meeting. Very sad, really. He was so young for a Zephyrian. And the Empire just happened to collapse at the same time. Sometimes when you remove the keystone from an arch, the whole structure falls down." Lisa returned to her reading. "It's basic physics, really." Jake stared at her for a moment, then shook his head. "Remind me never to get on your bad side." Lisa smiled her diplomatic smile. "Captain, I'm just a trade negotiator. I wouldn't hurt a fly." But as Jake left her quarters, he couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere in the galaxy, entire civilizations were going to think twice before threatening humanity. Word would spread about the human diplomat who had walked into the most dangerous palace in known space and walked out with everything she wanted. They would learn that humans had many faces. Sometimes they were diplomats, sometimes explorers, sometimes traders. But when pushed too far, they became something much more dangerous. They became the thing that even monsters learned to fear.